So welcome to today we are having our regional synergies, and we have special guests to talk about the Economic Partnership Summit held in Lloydminster. For everybody who is new to this webinar series, this is the Regional Synergies webinar series, where we feature initiatives where Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups have worked together to create economic development opportunities. The purpose of Regional Synergies is to show collaborative, local win-win solutions. So you may notice that our name is Co-operatives First, but we believe initiatives like these could either be supported by a cooperative or not, but we're just here to build relationships between our neighbors. So this event is taking place in a virtual space, but I want to acknowledge that Co-operatives First is in Treaty 6 territory. So we're located not far from the Wanuskewin Heritage Park that has been a gathering place for over 6,000 years from people across the Northern Plains and all of Turtle Island. So today we will start off with presentations from Milton and Teri-Lynn, and then we'll go through question and answer period with our panelists. So once again, thank you for joining us today. So to kick off today, for over a decade, the annual Economic Partnership Summit in Lloydminster has brought together business leaders and Indigenous people primarily in Treaty 6 territory to build partnerships, provide education, and grow businesses. Organized by a dedicated committee in the heart of Treaty 6, this innovative summit was established to develop Indigenous partnership with industry opportunities before it was actually called in the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action. So we will start off today with Milton Tootoosis. Milton was raised on the Poundmaker Indian Reserve near the Battlefords in his ancestral territory of the Cree, Assiniboine, and Saulteaux nations. His ancestors were innovators, hunters, gatherers, traders, and warriors. Milton joined the Saskatchewan Regional Economic Development Authority team in 2021 to help develop and advance strategies in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission final report and the 94 calls to action. He has built his career as a HRM practitioner, a community economic developer, including serving as a trustee for his nation and elected at Hedman from 2016 to 2021. He is a graduate of the First Nations University of Canada and an ongoing student of global Indigenous economic research and is certified professional economic developer. That's a mouthful. He serves as a founder of numerous community projects, including serving the chair of the Saskatchewan Indigenous Economic Development Network and is the director for Indigenous Leadership Development Institute, founders of the World Indigenous Business Forum. He is married and has 3 grown children and is now a Muslim and wants to ensure that we leave this planet in a better shape for the future of his grandkids. Milton is the founder and owner of MGT Consulting and is based here in Saskatoon, Treaty 6 territory. He is actively involved in sports, culture, smart green home building, and Indigenous cultural awareness education for leaders, aside from his responsibilities as the Chief Economic Reconciliation Officer for SREDA. So welcome, Milton, and the floor is yours.
Hi. Thank you. Kinanaskumten kitatamskat no kakiuntu temtik mugitemios no mutaya. Gakyo, Gapemi Jitsieg. I see there's 20 people online, and Tawao, Tawao to this space and to this conversation. I just said welcome in my Plains Cree language to this wonderful opportunity to share. I growing up in the Battleford's Lloydminster region many moons ago. I never really thought of the region much because I spent most of my career in southern Saskatchewan, Treaty 4 territory. And when I came back after college and I came further north to Saskatoon, I was working for the Treaty Commission. And we'll start with that slide. And the Treaty Commissioner at the time, the former and now deceased, the late, great, honorable Bill McKnight was our Treaty Commissioner. And he approached me one day around 2010. He says, Milton, you should get to Lloydminster. I said, oh, why? And he said, well, it's a little boom town. Things are happening. This is when oil was selling at $100 a barrel, I think. And he also had family there. And he knew I was from there, from that region. And so I went door knocking and met with the mayor's office, various business leaders associated with the Chamber of Commerce, business service groups, the local college, and so on. And I presented to them this notion and this idea of calling a summit for the region, because best to my knowledge, there hasn't been one. And I am my wife teases me sometimes having this long collection of lanyards. When I come back from a conference, I show her my new lanyard. So I have this collection of lanyards. And she says, you must be the most conference-going guy I know. And I thought, yeah. But I also learn a lot from those gatherings. I learn from this is where I go to meet my mentors and to the chiefs and the kick-ass leaders, if pardon my French there, and the movers and shakers from the Indigenous community. Growing up, I thought maybe I was going to be a social worker, and I was came out of college, I would go out and solve all these social problems in our community. But I realized that's not my thing. And I got into HR, the world of human resource management, and was very I had some success in that space as well. And I thought, heading into the latter half of my career, I thought I'm going to change it up and get into economic development. Lo and behold, I started attending these new conferences, going into new spaces and new circles, and saying, "Oh my God, I didn't know all this was going on across Turtle Island, across Indian country." And I would come back with a little, enthusiasm, some inspiration, and some hope, because so many of our communities are still bombarded with social and economic problems, all linked to poverty. And so I proposed to the community, let's have a summit. Here's why. So I gave them a long list of reasons. And just to give you an idea, though, this is how I started. I would show them and educate the leaders that I was meeting back then about the treaty promise that both our ancestors made, the First Nations non-Indigenous communities made over a century ago. And this treaty medal signifies that. You'll see two individuals shaking hands, right? Looking at each other with I think some sincerity, making solemn promises and commitments to try get along, to live side by side, and to hopefully make a journey that is prosperous and beneficial for both camps. You will see in the image in the Treaty 6 medal, the sun in the background. There's water there and grass, and of course a village, an Indian teepee village. And then if you look in the middle between the two individuals, you see a hatchet. And some have indicated to me that signifies that let's bury the hatchet, the old phrase. We've had a tumultuous recent past. And you have to remember, in 1876, First Nations were starving, hungry, sick, and ready to go to war. And there had been the Indian Wars south of the border as well, for raging on for decades and decades. But up here in Canada, the First Nations were not healthy. They were hungry. Bison herds had disappeared, and they were in a destitute situation. So they understood that they had to enter into a peace deal, a peace agreement called the treaty. They also knew that the white man, the settlers, wanted access to the land for various reasons, obvious reasons. So they made a deal. It's called a treaty. And so I always started my conversations with the leadership in Lloydminster with that ideal that we make peace, we're not going to war, and we will allow the settlers into our territory because they want access to the land for agricultural purposes at that time. I don't think they're aware there was going to be $100 oil underneath, but they somehow knew, the leaders, the chiefs knew that they have something. No, we have something that they want, and let's bargain, let's negotiate, let's use that as a negotiating tactic, and so they did. But we all know the story. Didn't quite turn out as it was envisioned by the chiefs and by the many of the colonial leaders at that time, because I really do think some of the leaders representing the Crown had good intentions. Unfortunately, they had bosses in Ottawa who had other intentions. And so the relationship went south. It went sour almost immediately. The treaty promises made on behalf of the Crown were never delivered, and First Nations, including the Métis, did not have a good experience right off the bat. So we've trying to work our way out of that very, very tragic and sad history. I call it the dark ages of Canadian history. The truth is now starting to come out. And I'm always amazed because I'm in my 60s now. And I learned about this truth, about the dark side of Canadian history in 1981, when I took my first Indigenous Studies class at the Saskatchewan Indian Federated College, now the First Nations University of Canada in Regina. That's a long time ago. And I've been educating people, leaders, both Indigenous and even primarily non-Indigenous, but even Indigenous people. Some of our own people don't even know what the hell just happened. And why are we in this dire economic situation? Why do we have poor health conditions? Why do we have far too many people in jail and in homelessness situations in our urban centers, for example? So again, this big gloom and doom scenario has erupted almost immediately after the treaty talks at Fort Carleton and Fort Pitt in 1876. So we are now just starting to hear the truth as to what really happened. And then I had to flip the switch to, okay, we've got this big challenge. What do we do about it? So my job and my goal when I was at the Treaty Commission was just to try and engage the non-Indigenous business community. Not that there weren't conversations happening before my time, and because there were a lot of conversations going on, but there just weren't enough. And so I came to Lloydminster, and here we are. Teri-Lynn will take over after the next couple of slides, and I'm really, really, I guess as a guy who's preparing for retirement and building a retirement home on Poundmaker Indian Reserve, just east, 45 minutes of Lloydminster. It's beautiful country, oil and gas country, it's ranching, farming country. We've got minerals there, all kinds of ecotourism opportunities and so on. The sky's the limit in terms of what's there for our people in that region. So very, very excited about the future. And I think we're just laying the foundation for the next generation. So the work we're doing, Teri-Lynn, really is we really won't see the full benefits and outcomes until we're really old, and we might not even be around, but at least our children and our grandchildren, and especially our great-grandchildren, will benefit from all of this this conferencing and summits that are taking place in communities like Lloydminster. Next slide. not to bombard you with numbers, but here's some interesting stats I picked up from the a website called EDC. I think it's called Export Development Canada. But there's an estimated 50,000 plus Indigenous owned companies across Canada today. That represents about a $50 billion economy, or a contribution of about 50 billion to the Canada's GDP. But we also know that less than 2% of the small and medium enterprises in Canada are owned by Indigenous people. So it's still a small number. And some of the barriers to that growth, including, lo and behold, it's no different than for the non-Indigenous community, but access to capital. How do you start a business? How do you fund a business? How do you fund a startup? So it's not that different in Indian country, except there are other barriers that are so common to First Nations in particular that maybe non-Indigenous peoples wouldn't encounter. Next slide. And some of those include remoteness of a location. Geography is a given. Connectivity is a big issue in our remote communities. It's not an issue, it seems, for the most part, when you live in the urban centers, but once you start getting outside of the urban centers in the more remote areas, it is a big barrier, a big challenge. A lack of access to resources, especially around financial management, getting good financial management advice without getting hoarded and capitalized upon by financial management consultants. So that is lacking in our community. There's also this piece, and I won't get into this. If you want to learn more about it, connect with me in one of my upcoming future webinars or seminars that I like to do called the Indian Act, and talk a lot about this legislation that was never a part of treaty. But the federal government, lo and behold, unbeknownst to the chiefs, sprouted out of this legislation in 1876 called the Indian Act. So I always say the ink didn't even dry on Treaty Number 6, and Ottawa was already behind our backs crafting up this piece of legislation called the Indian Act, without any consultation, without the input of the chiefs, and unbeknownst to us. And that's something that we inherited, that I inherited, you all inherited, and something we need to fix. But I won't have time to get into that at this point. Capacity. I think First Nations are one of the greatest exporters of human capacity. Many of our First Nations go to school, go to college, university, get a degree or two, maybe a PhD, and don't come home, because oftentimes we don't feel like we're welcomed home, and a lot of our leaderships are not taking advantage of the brain power that we have in Indian country by keeping us out of the communities at times. So again, there's a lack of human resource capacity, and I can say that with 100% confidence, because when I went home and worked for my First Nation from 219 to 220, 216 to 220 as an elected official, I saw that. I think it's a big challenge. We just don't have the human capacity, the professional skills. There's people that worked for my administration that couldn't even write a letter, a formal memo, etc., in a business kind of way. So let alone start up a company. It's a huge challenge. So that is, like, I'm just going to say it as it is. It's a big challenge. Tokenism. When you start talking about businesses and JVs, partnerships, and so on, we know even appointment of officers like myself working for the city of Saskatoon, oftentimes they're token appointments, and the individuals are not given much authority or power to make real decisions that have a real impact and amounts to real engagement, and with real business partnerships that result in increased profits and increased profit margins for the First Nation or for the Indigenous companies, right? So it's a barrier, and we can talk more about that later if you wish. And of course, the social problems and socioeconomic issues, which are pointed out there, which I won't get into, as most of you should be aware of these barriers by now. Next slide. Here's a quote, and I'm going to wrap up by saying that true reconciliation or economic reconciliation will only be possible when we achieve vibrant Indigenous economies, economic self-sufficiency, and socioeconomic equality. And that's coming from a guy named Ted Evans, who is the national lead for Indigenous Exporters, or EDC. And I truly believe that myself. Next quote. Otherwise, I wouldn't use that quote. Here's a snapshot, guys, of the forums that I've been going to for the last probably 2 decades now. At the top, you'll see the World Indigenous Business Forum, which I am a board member of. I'm heading to Papua New Guinea for my 11th or 12th WIBF this October. And I've been to every single one of them, and I've been exposed to the global challenge that Indigenous cultures and communities are facing around the world, and some of the solutions that they are coming up with. And it's really, really invigorating. It's had a really positive impact on my life and my worldview now because of that exposure. So yes, I've had to travel to places. Somebody had to do it. Like I had to go to New York City, New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii, South America, and so on. So it's been a really, really enlightening experience. Now I have at my fingertips, thanks to social media, access to people, human resources around the world that have similar experience and background, similar culture, and be able to learn off of them as well. And I incorporate a lot of their thinking and their models in the work I do on a day-to-day basis. If you've want to stay closer at home, there's the Reservation Economic Summit put on by the National Center for American Indian Enterprise, I believe it's called, in the United States of America. Get down to Las Vegas every spring. I believe it's in March or April, what they call Reservation Economic Summit. I'd highly recommend you go if you have the time and the resources to go scope it out. One of the largest gatherings of First Nations people in North America. There's also the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, a group born out of Prince George, British Columbia, I believe, and they put on an annual major conference in Vancouver, focusing on renewable energy. And then closer to home here on the Saskatchewan side, we have the Saskatchewan Indigenous Economic Development Network, and I am chair of that. So you can follow me for more information about that organization. We too host regional forums, at least 4 per year, right here in Saskatchewan for economic development officers. The logos you see, I'm not going to get into those. You'll see, as an example, a snapshot of some of the Indigenous communities, both in the US and Canada, that are, I would refer to these as the KA tribes, the kick-ass tribes. They are well on their way to achieving economic self-sufficiency. Many of these First Nations have such good governance, such good leadership, great plans and partnerships to be able to say to Ottawa, we don't need your transfer payments much longer because we are earning more than what we get from our federal transfers from Ottawa. And many of these nations are at that point where they're saying, Ottawa, stay out of our affairs, get rid of that Indian Act. We are doing just fine without you. In fact, you messed us up for the first century. Now it's our turn to manage our own affairs, and we will do things the way we think they need to get done. And these nations are an example across Canada, US, that are in fact doing just that. So I get in more detail of these great practices in my seminars. Next slide. If you're wondering what companies out there are really engaged with the Indigenous community, what companies out there are really doing serious business with the Indigenous community instead of the beads and trinkets approach that I call it. Well, here's a snapshot. I won't get into them, but the logos speak for themselves. We have major companies, CEOs, boards of directors from these companies saying, we need to play a part in Indigenous reconciliation, in economic reconciliation. We need to find new friends, make new partnerships, and get into a business proposition where they win, we win, win-win situation. And that's an impressive list. In fact, right here on I'm dialing in from the Muskeg Lake Urban Reserve in Saskatoon, for where I have my part-time office set up. And proud to say there's a little coffee company called Starbucks being constructed just a block away from my office here. So it'll be the first Starbucks franchise set up on an Indian reserve, urban Indian reserve, I believe in Saskatchewan, maybe all of Canada. I did see one in Albuquerque, New Mexico this summer, and that little corporation is now starting to expand and across Canada as well. So you see for yourself these logos. There's many of them you recognize, representing corporations and entities, boards of directors who see that it makes economic sense. That there's a social responsibility component to economics, and we want to play a part of that. Okay, so if you have anybody in your circles, your business circles, saying, I don't know about partnering with those Indians, I don't think we can trust them. They're lazy, they're drunks, they're not very smart, etc., etc. Flash them the slide deck, and you can get a copy from Trista, and explain to them that, wait a minute, that mindset you have is outdated and very racist. And give your head a shake and look at the companies from these companies, the CEOs and leaders from these companies, I should say, who think otherwise. And next slide. Yeah, there we go. I just want to close by saying the leaders are in Indian country are saying, we don't need no more beads and trinkets. That may have worked 100 years ago plus, but it doesn't work today. And what they're saying now is, we just don't want jobs or a few contracts. We want to become owners, or at least part owners of that enterprise. So equity ownership changes everything, according to the Indigenous Resource Network. And I would have to agree. Even though we may lack the human resource capacity, we know how to partner. As I just showed you with those slides, the previous slides, and all those logos representing various corporations, our leadership's realizing that if we don't have the human resource capacity, let's partner with a company that does. But we want to be in an ownership situation, not just minimum owners or just bystanders anymore. Okay, so and that's the trend. That is the most exciting trend that I see happening across not just Canada, but indeed around the world. I think I'm done. Yeah, so there we go. Just to wrap up, be a part of the solution. Don't be a bystander and a critic, and just don't blame the Indians for their own problems, because we didn't create. This is not an Indian problem, as a leader once said. This is a Canadian problem. It's a challenge that we all need to meet head on, and if we do it right, as envisioned by the chiefs and by the leaders representing the crown over a century ago, and build that trust first and foremost, we can achieve economic reconciliation at its finest. So thank you. Ego se. Ego se pitama.
Sorry, I just had to.
Yeah. I will stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Milton. It was really informative, and to see all the companies that are partnering and have this real partnership in mind.
One day for taking that course. And
can I get everybody to?
It's not muted, but it is muted. But
Sorry.
There we go.
Okay. And so, yeah, it was great to hear. And I not, I'm a little bit envious of all the places you get to travel, although you're making it sound awe, you have to travel to all these wonderful new locations and meet so many great people. It's like,
It's a tough job, but someone has to do it.
oh, poor you. Okay, so next we have Teri-Lynn MacKie from the Lloydminster Chamber of Commerce. Teri-Lynn has been with the Lloydminster Chamber for 9 years. She joined the chamber in 2014 as the finance director and was promoted to the executive director in 2022. She graduated with her accounting technician diploma from Reeves Business College. In 2016, she received her Chamber College Level 2 certification with the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce. And Teri-Lynn is the chair, Commerce Executive of Saskatchewan. So welcome, Teri-Lynn, and
well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk about the Economic Partnership Summit. It is one of my favorite events. I think after last year, it was months after we were still getting phone calls saying, what an amazing event. I couldn't believe the energy in the room. So it was amazing. And I'm excited to talk about how we got to where we are and what this year is going, what our event is this year. So I will just get my slides going here. If you just give me 1 second. So the Economic Partnership Summit, as it was said in the beginning, we are a summit that is a nonprofit organization and with partners within the local organization of Treaty 6. For over 10 years, the Economic Partnership has been a place where Indigenous and non-Indigenous people and leaders can come together and forge new partnerships and drive the economic growth. Each year, the speakers include Indigenous businesses, executives, entrepreneurs, entertainers, and dignitaries. The event includes Indigenous dancers, drummers, keynote presentations, panel discussions, business connections, and more. So a brief history. The Economic Partnership Summit started in 2013, and it was originally called the Indigenous Economic Partnership. And through the years, we changed the name to Economic Partnership Summit just to make sure that it was the Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people felt welcome. Some of our past keynote speakers, we've had an amazing lineup. And I imagine Milt can talk about lots because he's been to every single one of these conferences. And then we were talking at the beginning of the conference, talking about how when Chief Clarence Louis came and he got lost in Lloydminster, and we're giving him like turn off 50th Street, and Milt's like, no, tell him to turn at the KFC corner. And so we're like, okay, turn at the KFC corner. Oh, I know where that is. Everybody knows where, Indigenous people know where the KFC corner is. I'm like, so we laughed and I was like, oh, okay. And a big part of it is in 2016, or before 2015, Milt was telling us, what are your deliverables? How can we measure the success of this event? And that's when in 2016, we brought in business connections. And the business connections allows businesses to make real business deals and partnerships right at the summit. Attendees can set up meetings with other businesses or community representatives and are able to sit one-on-one and discuss their product services and build constructive business partnerships. And it goes from everything from leadership. So there is the mayor of Lloydminster with the Honorable Jody Wilson-Raybould and the Chief Lewis from Onion Lake. And then just business connections through the whole event. And so some of the past deals that were made in 2018, the deals that were made were in a $1 million value. But last year, we can track that it was over $2.2 million worth of deal made at our event, which is a pretty amazing number when you think we had 200 businesses at the event, or 200 people at the event. So last year we hosted Jody Wilson-Raybould, which was an amazing, she is just an amazing leader and was just in awe of her. She was great. And this year we're our keynote speaker, the economic partnership will be held on Wednesday, September 27th at the Lloydminster exhibition grounds. And our keynote speaker this year is Ashley Collingbull. She is a model. She has a book deal in the works. She is an ambassador for Hill Burke and Burke, for the Saskatoon Blades, the Saskatoon Rush, and the list goes on. And it's we're excited to hear her story. So our schedule this year is we'll do, you could see here, we have 2 panels, an Indigenous partnership panel and an Indigenous innovation panel. And then we also have a fireside chat. And here's the list of our speakers. So the Indigenous Partnership Panel is Jeff Mulligan he's the Chief Operation Officer for Aztec Safety. Nigel McCarthy, he's the Director of Education for the Lloydminster Catholic School Division. And Trent Zacharias, and he's the Director of Communications, Engagement, and Indigenous Affairs with Synergies. The Indigenous Innovation Panel, there's Justine Sather, she's the GM for the Gold Horse Casino. James Ouellette he's the Senior Director of Employment and Strategies and Innovations at SIT. And Tracy Young McLean, the Vice President of Human Resources and Corporate Services with Rise Air. And our fireside chat is with the moderators, Kurt Price, and the interviewee is Mike Young. And he talks about HR issues and how to engage Indigenous communities and making sure that the Indigenous employees feel welcome and that you are meeting their needs. So a part of the business connections is we went digital a few years ago. And so this year we'll be using FeedLoop, and it's a platform where you'll have a list of all the attendees and you can make your meetings right there on the platform and then meet within the conference. And then you could also have their contact information right there as well. And so our partners for this event would not happen if we didn't have an amazing partnerships. So the Lloydminster Chamber of Commerce is just we are the managing partner. We make sure that we execute all of the administration, but to make sure that it is a well-rounded event, our partners are Lakeland College, Startup Lloydminster, the City of Lloydminster, the Lloydminster Catholic School Division, the Lloydminster Public School Division, Teams Alberta, Saskatchewan Institute of Technologies, Heart of Treaty 6 Reconciliation Committee, Lloydminster Construction Association, Onion Lake Cree Nation, and the Lloydminster Chamber of Commerce. And there's just one other thing that I forgot to put in the slide. There is also a youth component to this. So last year we had 275 students brought in at no charge to listen to the Honorable Jody Wilson-Raybould. So that is my presentation on what is happening this year for the Economic Partnership Summit.
Thank you, Teri-Lynn. It sounds so exciting. I was very happy to attend last year, and I had mentioned earlier when we were speaking that it was a bit overwhelming just because of how many people were in attendance. So I know there was the business networking, but I don't think I really moved like 10 feet away from my table. As soon as I'd start networking, there were so many great people and groups and businesses, industry all over Lloydminster and area, including communities, and looking for ways to partner together. So I want to thank both of you guys for your presentation. And at this point, I will open it up for questions. So if anybody has any questions for our speakers, please either put up your hand or put them in the chat, and this is your time to ask any questions. However, I do want to ask a couple questions that I have that I've been thinking of. Is one is many communities and municipalities on the call today may be interested in forming or considering a similar event in their area. Can you tell us more about how you saw this partnership would add value to you and your organization?
Milt, do you want to start that one?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's about educating. It's still about educating people on both sides. I can speak for First Nations communities. I know we've at times struggled to get more First Nations representatives at the summit in Lloydminster. And I think that there's still, although we've had great numbers for the last 10 years, there's still leaders, chiefs and headmen, movers and shakers from each First Nation community that don't even know about it, yet it's in their backyard. So I know the Chamber has made great efforts to get into the community, knock on doors, literally go and visit, literally deliver tobacco offerings to the leadership to join us at this conference and so on. So and then I don't have the solutions either at this point, but we do need to make an effort to get the message. If you're a First Nation leader, elected or non-leader, on this call today, or watching this video once it's posted after this webinar, make an effort. If you've never been, or if you've only been there once in 10 years, get to the summit. Make that commitment. It's only a day. It's only one day. We're not asking for a week commitment or for you to take a certificate course at the local university. It's just for a few hours, and it's the incredible relationships and contacts you can make there. And there's no guarantees, but what if? And I've run into people, Teri-Lynn, since even last year. Really pleasant to run into business owners, a privately held company owned by a family, and I did not know how much they've done on their own after we did a seminar for them, an online one during the height of COVID, and they took steps and action, real partnerships, real jobs, real partnerships, and so on. And they're just so excited and so glad they came and took part in this summit family, I'll call it that. And so when you start seeing results like that, it's there's no place to go but up. So I would recommend, again, to the Indigenous leaders and communities out there, get to these summits, not just this one, but to the others. But my goodness, if you're just a stone's throw away from Lloydminster, get to the summit.
Yeah, taking it from the other side is making sure that both sides are at the party at the same time, that it is an equal playing field, and that everybody has the opportunities, and that it is fair, and you could start to build those trust and that relationship. It's taken us, last year was our 10th year and was the most successful summit that we've had to date, and the energy in the room was unbelievable. But it has taken us 10 years to get there, and we didn't give up. We feel that there is that we have to continue growing this to make sure that the partnerships are made, that for the economic development for not only each individual person, but for our region, for our community, for Canada.
Okay, I see Janice has a question. Janice, if you'd like to take yourself off mute.
Yeah, thanks. Janice Alpine from the Tanaka Nation. and I'm coming to you from Akaskatleid, which is referred to as Cranbrook by Western Society. I didn't realize this was going to be a plug for your summit, to be honest with you. I thought we were actually going to be talking a little bit more about how to actually create those partnerships. I know, Milton, you said something about having a conversation with the chamber. At this point, we've done a lot of work with our local partners. My task here is to create the knowledge and the awareness of the Chinaka, because we were pretty much invisible in our own homelands. In 2017, I created a process where we can actually start telling our story, and it's marketing. We're actually supporting the marketing of the entire region. And one of the things that we noticed, that I noticed when we began, was the Indigenous component was missing. In all our regions throughout Canada, we have different regions, different provinces, and then within those we have different regions. And the regions are some of them are semi in the same the parameters of the homelands of the people, of the First Nations people. So it kind of makes it easier here in Cootee country to actually have the Tanaka's homelands, same stretch, but we go into the US. And that's kind of what our approach was to do. So right now I sit on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce and Cootee Rapids Tourism, Chronic Tourism, you name it. I sit on every board to create that awareness and developing partnerships. We've done that through the telling of our story and offering interpretation of the Tanaka. We do have, I do have a colleague. What we're doing right now is we're, first of all, and first and foremost, we work with the entrepreneurs in our region, the Indigenous entrepreneurs, not only Tanaka, but Indigenous, all Indigenous. And we've got quite a large area to cover. And we work with them, and some of them have excelled, extremely excelled. The Tanaka have probably come to the table just recently. I have my theory around that, and I know Milton was talking something about some independence that we seem to have, some dependence that we seem to have. That was a situation here, and it's with all Indigenous groups too. So I kind of have a theory, but now we're starting to get to the Jonathan and participate in that. I'm going to be honest, we were never business operators, not in Western society. We had to learn that. We had to get our legs about it. We also had to had to understand a level playing field, which we have. So there's a lot of things that has come out of working not only with the marketing piece and understanding Western society's way of operating business, because we are totally different. We do things differently. And we also have both of us, both myself and my colleague, he's dealing with some infrastructure around the fiber optics, getting a broadband in place, working with the communities and developing I believe it's a treatment center. And so there's a larger developments that we're engaged in our communities only with the branding initiative. I just wanted to share that, and I appreciate Milton when you talk about traveling different places. It does help. I've been here since 2011, and I've done my tour route of the business economic. One of the things that really grabbed me as I was doing this just recently is the Indigenous Institute with Errol and Hilton, who's introduced Indigenomics. I think maybe you want to check that out as well, because Indigenous is actually is actually very interesting, and it is something that we could become familiar with, because it does take a look at our values. It takes a look at our economy, which is number 3, our society, which is number 2, and our land base, which is number 1. So it kind of goes into that. Those are our priorities. Then it also takes a look at encouraging Western society and any organizations out there to partner. The best partner that they will ever have is an Indigenous partner, an Indigenous business owner. And so then that's kind of encouraging in this part of the country anyway, in the western part of the country, we're talking about doing that. And it seems to make sense, and it's falling into place, because we do have the land base. We do have, we can increase our land base if needed to as well. So it's quite interesting how to taking a look at that. So don't miss that one out. Anyway, I just wanted to share some of the things that we're doing on my end of things. Okay, actually, it's like I'm on a phone. Talk to you later. Click.
Thank you very much, Janice. So one question that I'm really curious to know is, well, I attended last year and it was an amazing sold out event, but I would you be able to give any insights on what was the first event like, and like what were some of the lessons you've learned over the years? And as a follow-up, how did you guys get so many amazing speakers to attend?
Oh, well, I was at the first one, and it like I said earlier, it took a year plus of lobbying the business community to even convince them to do it. And I'm so glad the chamber stepped up and said, we'll do it. We can lead this. It was really, I think the key kickoff speakers I recall were Chief Darcy Bear, I believe, from Whitecap, Dakota, because he is still a rock star in terms of First Nations development, economic development. But I think that helped, is that because I knew working with the committee that we needed a star attraction, right? And he was, and I think that drew people. We also had, knowing Lloydminster was a hockey town, we had Reggie Leach there, former Stanley Cup champ, Team Canada member, and he happens to be and he still is, he was the spouse of Don Madabi Leach. Don Madabi is the chair now. She was co-chair at that time of the National Indigenous Economic Development Board. So we needed somebody, we felt as a committee, to bring the national picture, attach with her the hockey star, and that kind of drew the attention. Let's face it, Lloydminster is a hockey town and probably primarily male, so the word got out in the community. Sure enough, the old hockey fans showed up, and then Chief Darcy Bear. So I think, you do need to bring in well-known people, the people that get a lot of press, and to attract the locals to come out, because you got to give them that extra why. And I would say the first, I'm always excited at any business summit to hear a Darcy Bear, to hear Robert Louis, Clarence Louis, Jody Wilson. I'm always want to get a crumb, and a little bit more information, maybe a quote from them, and so on. So there are people out there you don't have to motivate, because they seek out those speakers and they will come. But then there's others out there who kind of say, well, I'm too busy. I am the chief, or I'm the head man or counselor for my band. I got to go out and catch dogs today. We got some burning issues in our backyard, and so we got to figure out how to get those people into the room, because everybody, I don't care how experienced you are, including guys like me, older guys like me, there's always something more we can learn from somebody, and they may even be younger than us. Right. So maybe I'll stop there. What have you heard, Teri-Lynn, from
Well-
the first summit or two before you arrived there?
Well, I think the beginning of the summit was more of education and starting to build those relationships from my perspective. And then once we started doing business connections and making that there's some tangible things that actually came out of this, and that we can go to business leaders and community leaders and saying, this is what's happening at our summit. And it's honestly, it's still a work to make sure that we get leaders to the event, the decision makers, and showing that how important it is to come together and break bread together and try and form these partnerships.
Okay. So we are closing in on 1 hour. If there is there any other questions from the audience, or if not, any final words from our speakers?
I would personally like to thank Milton. He has been a very big mentor, not only to me, but to our organization. He is one of the founding founders for the Economic Partnership, and he gives us such amazing guidance. And when you talk about speakers, we phone Milton all the time. What do you think who do you think we should bring in? Or do you have any good ideas? You've seen so many amazing speakers. Who do you think would work in our community? So I truly want to thank Milton for all of his help and his dedication of building just economics across the Treaty 6 territory.
And I would say this, if you're younger and you have the energy and a good sponsor and the resources to get to those summits in Las Vegas, the World Indigenous Business Forum, to the IEPS in Lloydminster, to those summits in British Columbia, across the country. CANDO is another great resource, Council for the Advancement of Native Development Officers, Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. So again, I was very fortunate to have the resources by from sponsors to attend those gatherings. And I always if I get impressed by a speaker, I go out of my way to introduce myself, get them my business card, and I follow up with a phone call, stay in touch with them, build that relationship with them. So when Tootoosis calls and say, hey, I have a request, I don't give up when they say no the first time. There's a second call, a third call, an email, and eventually they get tired of me and they respond and they say, okay, Tootoosis, we'll come to Lloydminster, right? Or whatever, right? So you have to build a relationship with those individual speakers. And mind you, some of them have agents now, right? Teri-Lynn, you got to go to the agent. You can't call them directly.
Speakers Bureau.
Yeah, speakers. So, but if they're not on a bureau list like that or have an agent, you have to personally go out of your way and get to know them. And once they build that trust in you and your profile, have a good profile on LinkedIn, for example, they will take your advice. That's all I have. That's all I have for now.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us today, and keep in touch. If you have any questions or anything follow up, please feel free to reach out to me. You can always reach out at Trista@cooperativesfirst.com. With this, I'll see you again.